From Wacko Chaco Studio, I'm Ashwin Chaco, and this is the Fruitful Life Show, a show about the business of creativity and the stories behind the creators that have made their dreams a reality. Hey folks, welcome to the Fruitful Life, the prolific Graham Thew. Hi Graham.
Hello there, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for taking time to join us on the
My
Fruitful
pleasure.
Life.
My pleasure.
So, for our audience that might not know you, do you mind just introducing yourself? Tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, sure. My name's Graham Thew, and I run a small studio called Graham Thew Design. And I kind of specialize in book design. So that's the large part of my work. And my business, maybe 70%. The other work would be like branding and just general design, but the majority is book design, which I've been doing for, gosh, let me think now, a good 25 years at this stage.
Wow, that
Yeah.
that is a career. Um, and I'm looking forward to digging into that. But before we do, one question I like to ask all my guests
Sure.
is if you could be a fruit, what fruit would it be and why?
Well, I'm vegetarian and I really don't like fruit, which is kind of odd. But
Okay,
if I had to pick a fruit, it has to be banana, surely. I mean,
right.
it's iconic. It's kind of slightly whimsical. It's
Yeah,
beautifully designed. Yeah, so I think I'd lean into a banana.
brilliant. First banana on the podcast.
First banana. I thought
Yeah,
everyone would have it. Wow.
yeah. So let's talk about you. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Were you always creative as a kid? Did you know designing book covers was a thing that you could like do as a career? Like, what's
Sure,
sort of
sure.
the path you went down to come to
Yeah.
where you are today?
Well, I was born in the UK and moved over to Ireland in 1975. My dad was in publishing, and so we were surrounded by books all the time. So I grew up just yeah, literally looking at books all the time. I kind of felt, yeah, early on I was definitely creative. Definitely wanted to do something in that field, and I always figured early on it would be illustration of some sort. So
Sure.
I grew up with things like loving things like Tintin, Charlie Brown, all that kind of stuff, and it really lent into that. So I spent, yeah, my childhood definitely drawing all the time. That was definitely what I wanted, and I kind of figured, okay, so once I got through school, I figured that illustration was probably the way to go. So I went to art college and discovered pretty quickly that I really wasn't great at illustration. I can do it, but it just takes so long. So my hourly rate would have been absolutely brutal. So I kind of experimented with all kinds of different creative elements like painting, sculpture, and so on, and kind of stumbled into graphic design really. I was like 17, I think, and kind of almost threw a dart as to which direction to go in. But yeah, I think having grown up around books as a kid, I definitely, without realizing, I think I had an empathy or an understanding of that visual design aspect. So yeah, so I think all through college, did graphic design. I was really mediocre, I would say. I certainly didn't have much apparent flair for it, and I think that kind of came on just through a few years of practice, really.
Right.
So I was very lucky in my last year in college. An Irish publisher ran a competition in the final year students to produce a book cover, and luckily I won, so I got to produce that book cover, and then that gave me a foot in the door. So basically, having done that first book cover, they were happy to give me another book cover, which is very kind because it was brutal. It was really not very exciting, not great work at all. So yeah, so look, that was my kind of foot into the industry, I suppose. And without realizing my kind of the lineage of experience that I had, I kind of naturally adapted into book covers. But again, my early work, man, it was not strong at all. So that really kind of developed quite quickly, I suppose. Needs must when you're a freelancer, you know. So
Yeah.
and that freelance path as well. When I left college, I had a couple of small jobs and the occasional book cover, and I mostly freelanced in studios.
Sure.
Purely, just for financial point of view, the hourly rate was better than working for somebody 9 to 5. And
Yeah.
in retrospect, I really should have put those hours in to learn the trade a bit better. But I was kind of stubborn and a bit big-headed, so I just jumped in to the freelance lifestyle from day one. So I suppose you learn on the job like that pretty quickly, and that kind of stood to me. But in retrospect, perhaps it would have been wiser to get a little bit more industry experience before going solo. But it's worked out fine. It's worked
Right.
out fine.
What are some of the things that you might have you wished you had learned in the studio
Ah,
setting?
gosh, that's a good question. I think, okay, so I guess I had a natural ability with book covers, I suppose, to some degree.
Right.
But things like the branding process, I just really, I really love it. But man, I really struggled with that process of how to craft the kind of perfect logo. And I suppose that develops into other aspects as well, like things like I don't know, just putting brochures together, how to be front facing with clients, the kind of nitty gritty nuts and bolts of really rather than the kind of creative stuff, I suppose, largely. Um, but you know what? I suppose you learn better by mistakes than by successes sometimes.
Yeah.
So I guess just by doing things wrong sometimes when you're young is a good way to learn.
Sure.
And you don't make that same mistake twice when it's your own, I guess, your own brand, your own names on the line or whatever, I suppose.
Do
So yeah,
you?
I think it would have been less stressful had
Yeah.
I had a bit more experience. But that's
Course.
fine.
Yeah, and can you think of, an instance where you're like, "Oh, man, that was a huge failing, but, like, after that, I."
Oh gosh, yeah,
Yeah.
there's got to be a few of those, hasn't there? Gosh, let me think. Um, yeah, I've had some pretty ropey designs in the past where, in retrospect, looking back, the client wasn't that happy, and I would have tried to shoehorn my design in,
Right.
and not realize, that the client is really obviously their voice is the most important, and
Sure.
even if they're wrong, you have to toe the line sometimes. So I suppose I spent some times batting my head against a brick wall, which I suppose most designers do to some degree. But you have to
Yeah.
learn, like it's a two-way street. Obviously, you have to adapt your skill sets to your client's needs, and even if those needs aren't great, sometimes you just have to go with the flow. So that would have been one thing. I think you know really basic things like negotiating skills. You can't just walk in. It's really hard, rather, just to walk in cold and figure out that stuff.
Yeah.
So I suppose again, learning the hard way, learning and getting that wrong a few times, undercharging, overcharging, that kind of stuff. Specific disasters, though, gosh, I'm sure there's a few, but they're not jumping to mind at the moment, thankfully.
Right, right, of course. And you bring up an important point there about like learning to negotiate
Mm,
in the process. And I'm curious because you work primarily in book covers, and that's
yeah,
a hugely collaborative process because you got the
yeah,
publishers having a say, you got the
yeah,
author having a say. Maybe
sure,
you're working with a secondary illustrator for
yeah,
some aspects of the cover. How
yeah,
does like what would be your key tips on how to have a great collaborative relationship with all these moving
sure,
parts?
yeah. Okay, so I guess there's a couple of things really. First of all, you need to have a framework of some sort. So if you're working with, like you say, all those moving parts,
Yeah,
you need to have a really well structured framework in place. So I'm sure it's the same with with the kind of work you do as well and other illustrators. Is
yeah,
that a working brief is just gold dust. A good, strong working brief is gold dust. So I've worked for years with Gill Books and their art director, and over like easily 10 years, we've really worked together on honing a good brief. So the ideal is that when you have a really strong brief, it's not just talking about the project, but it's getting everybody to sign on to what the goals are and what the bigger vision is. Even if it's not a specific idea, if everyone's on the same page at the start, it's really really important. And then I suppose if you have a really strong brief, it's about managing expectations and
mm,
managing people, being able to listen to people, being able to communicate when you're wrong and when they're wrong in a way that doesn't step on anyone's toes. That's really
yeah,
important. And as well, you've got to be super flexible as well. You've got
sure,
to be super flexible with your own process and your own ideas, and you have to take a stand sometimes as well. So it's that weird kind of balancing act between all that. But if you've got a really strong brief, then that solves like 80% of those problems. So if you're getting pushback from the client or from an author or from another party or marketing, if you can point to an aspect of the brief that you've all agreed on and say, well, listen, this is why, if we step back and look at a bigger picture, this is why we're doing this direction or whatever, because it's there in the brief, then it just makes it so much easier.
yeah, yeah,
Originally, when I started out, I would just throw a dart with the design work and say, well, this is the design. It's really good. You send it over and just, pace the battlements until you hear it back. So whereas now it's a much, and again, that's the kind of thing that going back to what we are saying about working in the studio, that's exactly the kind of process that you would have picked up. or I would have picked up rather, whereas I would kind of learn that the hard way. So yeah, it's great when it works. It's really lovely. It's really lovely
Yeah.
when you have everyone's really happy. It's just great. It's a really good feeling.
So suppose you do get a bad brief in today's day and age.
Mm,
Maybe it's a new art director you've never worked with.
yeah, yeah,
How
yeah,
do you
yeah,
go about creating that the expectations necessary to
yeah.
ensure that everybody's on the same page?
I'll be
Yeah,
yeah. I would yeah. Let's say if I get a bad brief, or it's not necessarily a bad brief, or a brief that is yeah. Let's say it's too broad, or it's not
yeah,
specific, or it's a bit fluffy. I would just dig into it a bit further. I have my own briefing process as well. So I have a questionnaire sometimes in those instances, whether it's a book cover or a logo, and
right.
that will have, it'll talk about all the usual stuff about who's the market, and da, 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 da. But I'll also have things like, if this product was, or if this book cover or logo was a TV show, what would it be? If it was a item of clothing, what would it be? Uh, and these kind of broader, almost metaphorical questions can
Mm,
sometimes give you a really good insight. So if I get a bad brief, I'll just go back and just hash it out a bit further and have a
yeah,
discussion and try and get everyone on board. But like you say, it's yeah, it can be tricky. It can just sometimes you can get like an author, or you can get a marketing department, or the designer themselves can just get the wrong aspects. It goes wrong. It's going to
yeah.
happen.
So what I'm hearing, it's super important to ask the questions, ask more
Yes.
questions, dig
Yes.
in, be curious, and
Yeah.
get them to talk a little more about the brief, and then
Yeah. Of
that
course.
slowly dismantles some of the things maybe they said that are contradictory or
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
too
Yeah.
loose, and then you can start honing down. And
Yeah.
then do you create a document that like lists out here's the key things that we agree with, or is it more
Um,
like a conversation? Hey,
yeah.
here's what we've uh,
It
agreed to go
depends on
forward
the
with.
project. So
Right.
if it's like a book cover, it would just be verbal. It would be the chats, and
Right.
then you
Yeah,
crack
yeah.
on.
Yeah.
If it's something larger, like if it's a larger branding project, I
Sure.
definitely would, because that with a smaller project, you're dealing generally with the people who are directly involved in the project, and so communication there is fine. It's
Yeah.
just having a conversation. If you're dealing with something like a branding project where there's a larger group of people involved that you may not have contact with, it's really important to have that piece in place so that
Yeah.
everyone at least can see it, sign off, and then you can go. And to be honest, I mean, the majority of projects of book covers wouldn't require a lot of digging in like that. The
Yeah.
breeding process for a lot of them is quite straightforward, because you're dealing with things like biographies or cookbooks, and there's a relatively narrow spectrum within that kind of field that you can look at. Whereas if you're looking at books, fiction, for instance, or poetry, there's a much broader approach you can take. So in that instance, yeah, it's good to have the chats, I suppose, at that stage.
The other thing I'm curious about is about the fact that sure you had an in with that
Mm,
initial publisher, but did
yeah.
you face any level of gatekeeping within the industry to sort of go past that singular publisher who had
Yes.
taken the risk
Yeah,
with you?
yeah, 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 yeah. It's really hard. It's a very small industry in Ireland.
Yeah.
So I've worked with publishers in the UK, and I've worked with publishers in the US, and it's a trickier ask, for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. Obviously, a lot of the big publishers in the UK have in-house design studios anyway, and they have a small list of books that they put out to sort of named designers, let's say, and that's a really really hard industry to crack into. So, in general, in kind of broad strokes, I'd work with some smaller publishers in the UK, but the vast majority of the work I do would be within the Irish field. And again, because it's quite small, once you have, any kind of a workable portfolio, it's just a matter of knocking on doors, I guess, unfortunately, and just keep it, in the early parts of the career, it was just, yeah, I just go around the portfolio back before the internet, and just knocking on doors and showing the work, and just keep doing that every, once or twice a year, just keep doing it. And eventually people go, God's sake, right here. When you're relentless, you just,
Yeah.
it's yeah, the Irish market is quite small, so it is quite hard to crack into. It's hard to make a career solely as a book designer in the Irish market. You definitely need to have a wider net.
Yeah. And speaking of it being sort of small community, what do you
Yeah.
think is the importance of relationship building within it? And how
So
have you
how do you
gone
mean?
about? Huh?
How do you mean? How so? With
Well,
relationship building with?
well, the saying in Ireland, at least, is it's not what you know, it's who you know,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
and so it's all about building that rapport with certain
Mm,
people, and then your name gets around, and
yeah,
opportunities start opening up, and then it's the continuation of fostering those relationships
yeah,
with those
yeah,
people that ensures that you stay in the loop,
yeah.
and
Surely,
also like
surely.
contributing to that specific the book community, as it
Yeah,
were,
yeah.
because there are so many segregations within the creative community in Ireland as
Yes.
well, like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and they
100%.
don't necessarily always mix.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it is a small community, so I think working with like illustrators is great. It's really good. Just having those relationships, and I suppose just seeing the work out there is obviously really helps. Um, as far as the kind of community of book designers, there isn't really a strong one, I'd say, in Ireland. There's a handful of book designers, of really good book designers in Ireland, whose work is really, really strong.
yeah,
Um, but I would say it's yeah, I think it's more about just knowing, I suppose, that how the community of publishers interacts as well is the sense that they all
yeah,
use a similar amount of book designers, I suppose, to some degree. There's a
right,
handful working. So I suppose, yeah, as far as community goes, there's not really a strong, I would say, book design community per se, but there's certainly a strong illustrator community. I'd say it's stronger.
yeah, yeah. uh, and because it's so niche, and this
Mm.
is something that a lot of young creators struggle with, because you have some people telling them they need to niche down, some people
Ah,
saying you need to go wide. What are
yeah,
your thoughts on it? Because you seem to have like gravitated and niched quite quickly
yeah,
after you graduated, whereas a lot
yeah,
of people struggle to do that. What are your
yeah.
thoughts on that?
I would say I think it's really good to go wide as you can, obviously
Right.
early on, to do as
Yeah.
much as you possibly can. So stick your hand into packaging and branding and book design and web design and everything as much as you can. And obviously it's then hopefully you find what you really enjoy, what really gives you a rush. Um, and whilst book design is quite niche, I think as a designer you have to have a super wide palette to be a successful book designer.
Mm,
It's kind of, in a way, it's the antithesis of some, let's say, illustrator styles where you get very well known for a style and it's a
sure.
super sellable style. And that's what, and you can develop that obviously,
Yeah.
but that's what you're known for. And that can generate all kinds of client work for you. I think with a book, in book design, you have to be super, super wide in your creative spectrum. So if you have, two or three styles, it just the market just can't sustain that as a career. You have to be really, really wide in your approach. So that goes from being really strong with typography, some
Mm,
illustration work, but just having a really broad spectrum. Uh, but I think as far as experience goes, yeah, I'd always recommend do as much uh, dipping your toe in design baths as possible before you kind of fall into or select one particular area. The most design studios would have a much broader spectrum, I suppose.
yeah.
So I do other work as well. I'm a creative director with another designer, Gareth Jones, for the Arc, and so we do a lot of work with them.
Oh yeah.
We do like some interior work with them. We do all their shows, all their print production, all the creative stuff with them, which is great. And then I say I do some branding and stuff as well. But yeah, the most comfortable space, I suppose, really is book design for me.
Yeah. And because you work with such a wide range of books as well,
Mm.
and topics that you cover, um, I'm curious about how you go about, because you can't have knowledge of everything that these books cover, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So, what's your process? How do you get inspired with,
Mm.
say, a topic that might be unfamiliar or
Mm.
harder to grasp? And maybe it's economics, and you're not that into
Mm.
economics, or I don't know, it's a topic that you're not that familiar with.
Yeah, yeah,
What
yeah.
is your approach in those instances?
I think again, let's say we start off with a really good brief,
Yeah,
and even if that good brief is just the blurb on the back of the book,
yeah,
and you get maybe the introduction to the book at that stage because the book hasn't been fully written. So with any luck from that, you're going to get, say it's on something like, I don't know, Irish poetry or
Yeah.
economics, like you say, or playing the trombone or something. I have no notion at all. At all. If you've got a really good introduction, a good brief, and you've got a blurb, then that should be enough to formulate, well, why is this book different? What's
Yeah.
the angle this book is taking? And then it's about, it could be either conceptual work and thinking about, just great design solutions that are clever in some way, or it could be just doing lots of great image research and coming up with something, finding some fantastic imagery or some kind of illustrated approach. But really, it's about how am I going to how am I going to package this concept, like all design. That's what it comes down to. So if I'm doing 3 or 4 books on economics, let's say every year, they all have to have a different tone of voice, and
Yeah.
presumably they have a different thing to say, and you just really have to focus in on that, and in some way try and represent that. And a lot of the time, that's through just the basics of really good typography and image choice. Other times, it's really conceptual. But no, you certainly aren't expected to understand the nuances of every project you take on.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, it's the brief will say, "Here is this book. It's a bit like these books. We don't want it to
Right.
look like these books. And here's the introduction." And often that's enough to get a really good start.
Yeah.
And like any
That's
process, then so the initial designs, might be right first time. Other
mm,
times they might be completely wrong. Usually, it's somewhere between those, and you tweak until you get that voice that's a really good match for what the author's trying to say.
yeah. Yeah. For sure. And for yourself, have you spent a lot of time building your own personal brand? What is your approach to
No, I'm terrible. Honestly, I really am. Okay, so I have a nice website,
Yeah.
which I'm sure gets like 3 hits every month. I do some. I have phases of being on social media,
Yeah.
but now, I mean, to be honest, it's about just it's nice to showcase the work.
Right.
But I don't really put the work out there in order to get more work in. So
Yeah.
I'm lucky in the sense now that I've built enough momentum that the studio is super busy, which is great. But certainly back in the day, yeah, I would have gotten, my original before, let's say pre-social media, it would have been like, oh God, dropping letters, hitting the streets with a portfolio, all that grim stuff,
Yeah.
which always, it did bring results, but it was pretty grim work.
Did you ever do
But yeah,
cold emailing?
hell yeah, I used to,
Yeah.
yeah, back in the day. And again, that's just oh man, it's better than cold calling
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
doorstep
cold
on the
calling.
phone. At least you're not, having those awful phone calls. But yes, I would have done some of that. Um, and again, back in the day, I would have definitely put PDFs together of my best work and my most current work, and just flooded all kinds of publishers around the world with that. And again, that would have come back with, I couldn't tell you how low the percentage was, but it certainly would have had some results, definitely. And again, it's not, it's I'm sure most practices are like this. It doesn't really matter. Well, it does matter how good the work is and how good, let's say, you produce the work for those jobs, but it's really about key relationships and how you
Mm,
connect with your clients as well. So, let's say, for every 5 jobs I would have done with one-off clients, you would hope that one of those would turn into a good relationship. And that's not just a case of, oh, the work wasn't great or the work didn't pay. It's about the relationship. So if you find a client that you have a good relationship with,
yeah,
that's gold dust. It doesn't matter if they're paying 50% less than a client that you just great with or you don't get on with or you find it hard to produce the work
right,
for. If you
yeah.
can find a good client that you both are on the same page, that's great. That's gold dust.
That's so true.
It's long-term clients. That's what it's all about, right?
Yeah, and that's that super important part of like building a rapport, a relationship, and making
Yeah,
sure that you work well, collaborate together. Because, like you said, yes, they're gold dust. Because I'd rather have a lower paying client that allows me, trusts me to
yeah,
do my job well,
yeah,
than have one that is nitpicking at everything I
yeah,
do. Then it's
yeah,
not the right client for me because they
yeah.
obviously don't trust the process and. Um,
Surely.
yeah. Um, speaking, like it's a fun story. When I first got here, I found
Yeah,
it very hard to cold call or get
yeah.
into agencies because everything is like secured. You can't just like walk into an agency and
Of
be like,
course
"Hey
not.
guys." uh, so like, which was different in India. You could like knock on an agency's door and be like,
Really?
"Hey, I'm here. I've got a portfolio. I'd love to show
Yeah.
one of your art directors." And they'd usually
And
like, "Oh, thanks for taking the initiative," you know? So
so
that
what happened here?
here it was like, "Oh yeah, you need to make an appointment." You can't
Oh yeah,
even go into the door because there's
yeah,
like buzzers
yeah,
and all the security
yes,
stuff. So
yeah. It's like some
it's
kind of Kafkaesque system where there's a few hoops to jump through, right,
yeah,
before it gets to the right.
exactly.
Well, you hope it gets to the right person, and they're in the right mood.
And then you're sending emails, but like you don't know if anybody's reading them because you're
Yeah.
like, does it just go
So
into this like giant slot spot like slush
yeah,
pile?
yeah, yeah. So
This
what
is
was
a
your
lot
hit
of
rate
email.
like early on then?
Very low. Like
Very low. Yeah, I think that's
in
everyone's
Ireland,
experience, to be honest.
it was just yeah. I fortunately I got one email back that turned into a job. And then from
Yeah.
there, the relationships I made within that, like, because it's interesting over here, not a lot of people stay at the same agency for very long. And
Mm,
so your coworkers who might have been there for a year or 6 months,
yeah.
uh, a year later, they're all at different agencies. And so
Really.
now you know somebody in all those
Yeah.
different agencies who
You got a
can
foot in the
vouch for
door.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And so
But
then
you're fully freelance now, right? You're working for yourself.
oh
You're not
yeah,
working
yeah.
agencies.
It's
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I only worked for an agency here for 6 months, and
yeah.
then it was like struggling
That was
and
well. That's very similar to my path for sure. So, what made
right.
you decide to stop doing that? Was it just you wanted to do your own work, or what was your
Well,
motivation?
I couldn't find another agency that in 2018, so it kind of just
Yeah, yeah,
forced me to like,
yeah,
okay, you just better
yeah.
like pull up your pants and
Well, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
I actually used LinkedIn and reached out to
Very
all
good.
these people, and I was just like,
Great.
hey, I'm new to Ireland.
Yeah,
I've done a little bit of agency work. If you know of anything, I'd love to just grab a coffee with you, have a chat,
yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
even learn about the cultural differences and all
Brilliant.
the rest. And
Also,
so that, yeah,
fear is a great driver as well.
yeah, especially when you
Blind,
have three kids. Too.
especially when you have kids, blind
Yeah,
panic is great for like deciding you don't give two shits. You're just gonna
yeah,
do whatever it takes, right?
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
But it also helped me clarify like the types of jobs I wanted and the
yeah,
types I didn't want. Like my lowest point was probably 2018. I had to take a job at
mm,
GD Sports, like
yeah.
slogging away at like
Oh
three,
man.
what was it, 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. That was the only shift I could get.
Oh
It
come
was like
on.
the Christmas rush at
Oh
times, so they
man,
were
that's
just
harsh.
hiring everybody.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
was
yeah,
like, at the end of that, I had one part-time job.
yeah,
Well, one
yeah.
freelance design job uh, for half a day once a week, and
Oh man.
that paid more than a
The
whole
JD
week
Sports.
worth,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
3 times more than a whole
yeah,
week's worth of time. And I was like, okay, it's not about doing the work or
yeah.
working hard. It's about choosing the right type of work for you.
That JD Sports job will be invaluable in your career path, I suspect. It's a key part of your professional career.
Yeah, kick up the
You
butt.
realize, yeah, this is I can't do this. I've got to do something. You know,
Exactly. Yeah,
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 brilliant. Yeah, well, it sounds very similar to my path for sure. I just kind of jumped in and realized, yeah, this is what I want to do. I don't want to work for somebody else.
yeah.
It was probably a bit arrogant at the time, but it's definitely if you've got that drive,
Yeah.
it's great. You know.
And for yourself, moving from England, was there much of a cultural difference on how
Oh
they do
man,
things here, and what
I
was
was
that like?
I was 5 years old, so I
Oh,
can't really
okay,
speak to that too much.
right, right, right. Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
I thought you did university in the UK and then came
No,
over
all
here.
here, all
Okay,
here.
okay, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So that's different. So what would be one piece of advice you would give a young and upcoming creator?
Oh gosh. I would say, yeah. Okay, one piece. That's a tricky ask, isn't it?
Well,
One piece of advice. Okay. Well,
top
okay. I'll give it
top bits of advice. Let's say.
top bits of advice.
Yeah,
Okay, I would say, yeah, experiment as much as you can
yeah,
across styles and fields, and try and find that kind of element that really gives you the rush. That sense when you're working that you're not working at all. That's what you're
yeah,
really looking for is that creative flow that you can get into. And no job is going to have that 9 to 5, but if you can find that little wedge where you get to do that regularly, and you're good at it, that's great. And the only way you can really find that is keep experimenting, keep pushing. Just keep if you're not, if you're working in JD Sports, then do some personal work that you love outside of that time.
Yeah.
But try and find the stuff that gives you that rush, that buzz. And if you can find that, then your working life's going to be great, and you're going to be good at it.
Yeah. That's great.
And also, yeah, also be relentless as well. If you want to, work somewhere, or you really want to break into a field, is just unfortunately you just have to keep sometimes butting your head against that door.
Yeah.
Just keep
Yeah.
at it, and eventually they'll crumble.
Yeah. So true. So true. I mean, like, yeah, I could say from experience from most of my career, that's how I've gone through. It's just being
Yeah.
persistent
Yes.
In the face of a lot of no's and doors being
Yes.
closed.
And it's really uncomfortable. I'm not a pushy person in any way. I'd be really uncomfortable with that. But you just have to sort of bite the bullet, I suppose. And it can be very dispiriting. But if you've got a spark, if you've got a creative spark, and there is something in there, you have to be true to it, and you have to really, really push for it. And it'll eventually that'll pay off for sure.
I suppose the question I ask myself is it worth the pain? What's the payoff in this? Right? And
Yeah.
generally the payoff is a lot better than
Yeah.
the pain. And
Yes, of course.
it's ensuring that that is set into your mind. And then when it comes to it, then it's a lot easier to,
Yeah.
deal with the pain at the moment,
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the discomfort at the
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah,
Uh,
100%, 100%. So you're like that was 2018. You were saying that you kind of started your career, and it's obviously going really well.
yeah. Well, I would have had a career in India. Like
Yeah,
I started working in 2009 freelancing,
yeah,
then would have worked in agencies 2014, 2015.
yeah.
And then I had just started end of 2015. Me and a buddy got together. We started our own agency called
Oh,
Custom
great,
Play.
very
And
good.
just as we started, this opportunity came to move here.
Here,
And so
wow, that
for
was a decision.
2016, yeah, like
Gosh,
it's hard.
and was it the right decision? Has it worked out?
It has, yeah. I mean, definitely, it's been the right decision because for my family in general, because
Yeah,
my wife's Irish. That's the only reason we came over, so that
yeah,
she could be closer to her family and stuff like that.
sure.
Um, but there's so many opportunities here. Like I don't think I could have worked as an illustrator in India,
Mm, yeah.
uh, purely as an illustrator, whereas here that possibility is there, or
Okay.
those
So
opportunities are there.
yeah, brilliant. And I think there's such a renaissance of illustration in Ireland at the moment. The last few
Yeah,
years, it's a fantastic time uh, to be to be involved and to be working as an illustrator in Ireland. I'm really
yeah,
lucky. I get to work with loads of fantastic illustrators, and it's just great showcasing their work, and just having that process with them, working hand in hand with them on some great projects. So yeah, it's a really exciting time.
yeah. And I also think like they actually take it as a serious job here.
Totally, yeah, 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 yeah,
Instead of
yeah,
being like, oh, that's a hobby you do. You
yes,
like to
yeah,
draw pictures, don't you?
yeah. Well,
Come
this
here,
is it.
do a portrait of my niece, would you? It's her birthday. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, so the last question I like to
Yes.
end all my interviews with is, what does the word fruitful mean to you?
Gosh. Um, I think yeah, I think I've already alluded to it earlier. It's about if I'm doing some work and I come up with a solution to a
Mm,
really tricky design that's just really nice, and I really enjoyed getting there. And
yeah,
actually, by the process of getting there, I kind of lost myself in it.
sure.
That's a fruitful day for sure. Where you've done 4 hours of work that's felt like 4 hours of just doing what you absolutely love and not even being aware of those hours passing by. That's a fruitful day.
Being in that flow state.
Man, like I say, you can't get it's never going to be 9 to 5, but if you can get 1 or 2 days a week at that, that's a win, right?
Yeah, 100%. And hey, thank you all for listening to this episode of The Fruitful Life. I hope you walked away with some nuggets of wisdom. And if you did, please do me a favor and leave a rating and a comment to tell me what you think of the show. Also, consider telling a friend who might like it. As always, be true, be you, stay fruitful.